Hey guys, Zomfox here, and today is one of both the saddest and craziest videos I've ever done on the channel because the UFL announced its roster cuts down to 58 players for each team. For those of you who don't know, there were two dates in terms of getting certain players, and today, March 10th, 2024, was the day all teams were required to get down to 58 players. And dude, some of these guys that got cut are unbelievable surprises. We're not talking about just good free agent signings or players. We're talking about all USFL and XFL talent that got released today that are now free agents that could re-sign or go anywhere else or might even be gone from spring football now. It's insane. So let's just get right into it by going over every single player, but really going fully into some of the big names. So let's get right into it with the Arlington Renegades. So in terms of the players that got released or put on waivers, BJ Bello, middle linebacker, Trayvon Cooley, defensive tackle, Doug Costin, defensive tackle, Morgan Ellison, halfback, Nasir Greer, defensive back, Charles Hall, wide receiver, Elijah Hamilton, cornerback, Calvin Jackson, wide receiver, Matt Landers, wide receiver, Christian Morgan, free safety, Drew Plitt, quarterback, Teton Saltz, tackle, Jared Scott, tight end, Jake Stetz, guard, Nasir Watkins, center, and Jordan Wright, linebacker. Now, in terms of some of the bigger ones, Gerard Scott was a dude we thought was going to have a lot of playing time with this team until Sal Cannello re-signed, so him being released is not really a shock. But Doug Costin, that's a bit of a shock. He was a pretty big free agent signing during the offseason for, I believe, the Stallions, and then, was ended up able to be drafted by the Renegades. And seeing him cut is a bit of a shock, but Morgan Ellison, that's a pretty big one. We did not expect him to get cut at all. That is honestly a pretty big one. That's a pretty out there. He was a really solid running back to have on the team, and seeing him gone it's a shock. But I would say that Drew Plitt, though, he is a quarterback that some people will try to make as a big deal. I'm not super shocked at it. I mean, you could have expected him to stay on as a third string, but the fact is we knew this team was going to be Lindsey Scott and Luis Perez, and we didn't get any, massive training camp shock with that one as those two guys are still in the roster. But overall, the Renegades, I think, are one of the least surprising of all the teams. There still are a couple surprises, as I mentioned, but they're probably in the lower spectrum because the Stallions, oh my god, this one is shocking. Now, getting into the players, we have Calvin Ashley, guard, Terrell Bonds, corner, Owen Carney, defensive end, TJ Carter, safety, Larnell Coleman, tackle, Bobby Holly, fullback, Trevin Howard, linebacker, Chris Lacey, wide receiver, Hercules, Matafa, defensive end, Mark Milton, corner, Jalen Morton, quarterback, Caleb Sampson, defensive tackle, Josh Sokol, center, Channing Stribling, corner, Curtis Weaver, defensive end, and James Wiggins, free safety. So right there, Calvin Ashley, that's an all-USFL offensive lineman, cut. Channing Stribling, an all-USFL corner, cut. Two shocks right there. Now, Channing Stribling, maybe it's injuries. I mean, some of these guys might have minor injuries they're playing through or something, and that's why they're not, doing great in training camp or something. But seeing both him and Ashley get cut are pretty big shocks. We're talking about guys who at one point were considered the best at their position and now are, free agents. Then, sadly, you hate to see it, but Jalen Morton, there's no shock that he got cut. The fact is that it's very obvious in a talent perspective he was the odd man out. When you have Adrian Martinez, Matt Corral, and Jamar Smith, of course you're going to be the one left out. And then Bobby Holly, I'm a bit shocked having a fullback on your roster is, if you have one, you can use him. But Hercules getting cut as well is a pretty big shock. He was one of their best additions in the offseason. And then Terrell Bonds as well is a pretty shocking one. The Stallions really had a lot that are shocking. Yes, I've talked about it before. Them and the Defenders are by far the two most talented teams in the league. So a lot of good players were going to end up getting cut. But seeing guys like Stribling and Bonds get cut for the corners when their, DBs was considered probably their biggest weakness on paper, and then Calvin Ashley going, these are some big shocks. They're definitely up there in some of the more shocking ones. Just pretty shocking, but, I mean, you hate to see it. It is what it is. And the DC Defenders, the other really loaded team, Elijah Blades, cornerback, Adonis Boone, tackle, Ben Breshnahan, tight end, Isaiah Coulter, wide receiver, Mike Harley, wide receiver, John Hightower, wide receiver, Donovan Jeter, nose tackle, CJ Johnson, wide receiver, George Moore, tackle, Chide Okiki, tackle, Jack Plum, tackle, Boogie Roberts, DT, Trey Shropshire, wide receiver, Adam Sparks, corner, Tobias Taylor, running back. In all honesty, none of these are super shocking, except for one guy, Boogie Roberts. Boogie is a massive piece for a team to have because he does two things. One, he's a great DT, but two, you're talking about one of the most, personable, famous guys in spring football. This is a dude who's loved by the public. Him getting cut is just insane. I mean, really, that is, I think, the biggest shock, arguably the whole off. Well, there's one that I think is a bit more shocking, but it's it's up there. Look, there's a couple really shocking ones. This came out just a little while ago. I'm posting this early because of how big a deal this is. And it's just hard to process that you see a guy like Boogie get cut. I mean, you hate to see it. You're talking about just a massively popular dude, and now he's a free agent. Hopefully another team picks him up, but for the DC Defender's sake, aside from him, I'm not super shocked by a lot of these guys. Seeing them cut down in the receiver room, I'm not super shocked. It's just Boogie is definitely a really big one. Then the Houston Roughnecks start off with a really shocking one. Luis Aguilar, kicker. Then we have Nick Buchanan, center. Isaiah Chambers, DE. Gene Coleman, wide receiver. Ezra Gray, running back. That's a shock. Jake Halafa, defensive end. Reggie Howard Jr., another shock defensive tackle. Ryan Izzo, tight end. Jeremiah Johnson, corner. Shamari Jones, running back. Dan Lake, corner. Ryan Nall, running back. Wap Philyor, wide receiver. Tio Redding, wide receiver. Jakari Robinson, center. Kalen Tolson, linebacker. Bryson Young, linebacker. Kalen Tolson is a bit of a shock. I mean, we're talking about a pretty solid player this past season, if I remember correctly. But just some of these ones are really just... Luis Aguilar is insane. You're talking about a dude who was basically just considered one of the best guys in the entire league at what he did. I mean, a lot of people gave me a lot of hate for me not putting him at number 1 in the kickers list. And I put him there, and then, you know what I mean? Like, it's just a shock, man. I mean, you're talking about a kicker that a lot of people view as really, really good. And even I, as a guy who had him low on my list, still had him top 3. Him getting released is a massive shock. Then Ezra Gray is a pretty big one. One of the running backs that they had and made sure to have this upcoming season. I don't know. Reggie Howard Jr. is a big one, too. Now, I'm honestly kind of shocked at the lack of defensive tackle and defensive ends getting cut because they're so loaded at that position that they already have a ton of depth there. And getting rid of Reggie Howard Jr., that's one of your best players on that D-line. Well, I wouldn't even say that because their D-line's just that loaded. But you know what I'm going with? They have a bunch of insane talent on that defensive line. To only see a couple guys really get cut from it is kind of shocking. Now, trimming down the wide receiver room, I'm not too shocked. Curtis Johnson is the best receivers coach in this entire league, so I'm not really worried about any of those. But Aguilar and Reggie Howard especially are massive shocks. Then the Memphis Showboats. Clayton Bradley, tackle. Jordan Brailford, defensive end. Antoine Brooks, corner. Kazan Daniels, linebacker. Derek Dillon, wide receiver. Really shocking. Kurt Kelly, guard. Colin Hill, linebacker. Teron Hunt, guard. Darto Lee, tackle. Will Likely, corner. Shocking. Dylan Moses, linebacker. Really shocking. Antonio Reed, defensive DS. Michael Stevens, DB. Jeremiah Valawaga, defensive end. Josh Van, receiver. Sidney Wells, tackle. And Kareth White, running back. Kareth White's a shocking one. He was really solid a few weeks this past season. But it makes sense. You have 2 really good running backs now in Trey Williams and Darius Victor. Not super shocking, just a bit shocking, but you kind of understand it. It's just like Drew Plitt, the odd man out. But man, Will Likely, that's a really solid cornerback that you lost. And then Dylan Moses, he was a pretty big free agent signing they had. He's one of their biggest ones. This is a guy who had a lot of potential, but I guess the injuries he had in college, if I'm not mistaken, it was like an ACL. If I'm not mistaken, that's what happened and why his draft stock fell so far. But Derek Dillon, man, wow. Derek Dillon is a shocking one. This is a dude who was both really great as a receiver, but also as a return guy, specialist, special teamer. Seeing him go is a shocking one. They must really be having, a lot of, I guess, love to the rest of the guys. I don't know. That's a shocking one. Talking about a really solid wide receiver, one of the best this team had this past season. Definitely a shock, but he is a guy that was, an incumbent player. He wasn't one of the guys that DeFilippo brought in, so maybe scheme just didn't work with him. That's what it is. Michigan Panthers, there's a couple shocking ones here. Damian Daniels, defensive tackle. Isaac Darkangelo, linebacker. Keandre Evans, corner. Nick Gagemos, tight end. Lance Lenore, receiver. Shocking. Brian Lewerk, quarterback. Shalem Luani, shocking, safety. Garrett Mag, wide receiver. Cole Murphy, kicker. Shocking. Denzel Okafor, tackle. Jamal Perry, safety. Corey Rahman, safety. Warren Saba, safety. Phil Sala, tackle. And Colby Tucker, tackle. Now, Cole Murphy was one of the weaker kickers this past season, so I'm not actually really against this, in all truth. I think there are guys you can get that are better, especially with Luis Aguilar being on the market. If you get him, instant upgrade. Lance Lenore is a shocking one, though. This is a guy who, when he was there in 2022, was their best receiver and was arguably the second best receiver in the entire league in all of spring football at the time. Now he's fallen that he's not even able to make the roster anymore. Maybe it's, he got an injury last season. Maybe it has something to do with that. It's a shocking. And then Shaylin Luani, that's also a shocking one. He was a massive massive guy they got during the draft process, getting him and Tornaden. And it's a shock. They let go of like 4 safeties. They had a lot of them. So I guess it's both good and bad. It's good in the sense that there's a lot of, belief in the guys they have, but it sucks that one of your biggest names you got is now gone. And then Brian Lewerke is one of those, another odd man out situation. E.J. Perry and Danny Etling were better than him, so not really shocking. Then the San Antonio Brahmas, we have a lot of guys. This team had a bunch of players. They hadn't cut really anyone heading into this point. The first one is Matt Amendola, kicker, being cut. So yes, that means at least on paper, Destroying has won the kicking job for the Brahmas. Then Dooley Artisdale, wide receiver. Drew Beasley, defensive end. Kwabena Bonzu, defensive end. Trey Botts, defensive tackle. Michael Brown, offensive lineman. Cody Crest, receiver. Amari Cobb, linebacker. Connor Davis, lineman. Benji Franklin, corner. Evan Heim, center. Jason Luan, defensive end. Ryan Lewis, corner. Mac McCain, corner. Ryan Mueller, defensive end. Marvin Pierre, linebacker. Jalen Samuels, running back. Vernon Scott, corner. Cade Warner, wide receiver. Son of Kurt Warner, got cut. But of course, the big one is Matt Amendola. The fact is that none of these guys are, super shocking. Trey Botts is a bit shocking. But most of these guys, I'm not really shocked. I mean, we've talked about before, the Brahmas on paper are one of the weakest, are pretty much the weakest roster on paper. So trimming down the quote-unquote fat, no offense to these guys, but, the quote-unquote guys that aren't really good enough to make it, isn't really shocking. Trey Botts is a bit of a shock, but Matt Amendola getting cut is a big one. That does mean that Destroying has won the job. So congrats to him. We'll see how he does, when the season starts, as long as he still is the starter. But this is probably the least shocking of all of them because you didn't really have enough players that you could cut that would be shocking. So, yeah. Then the last team, the Battlehawks, Mandy Alonso, defensive end. James Bostic, receiver. Montre Braswell, corner. Anthony Siafi, safety. Marcus Kushney, defensive end. John Daka, defensive end. Kimura Gamble, tight end. Prince Charles Iwara, corner. Kevin Latalis, wide receiver. Andrew Mevis, kicker. Christian Olmstead, guard. Jadryan Taylor, defensive end. Jaston Turnitine, corner. McKinley Williams, defensive tackle. Not really shocked at all of these. I mean, there's a couple of guys that you recognize. You kind of recognize Turnitine and Alonso. But in all honesty, again, this one really isn't shocking. A lot of these guys aren't the more famous players on this team or the big name ones. Andrew Mevis, one of their kickers is gone, so the kicker battle is pretty much over at that point. Honestly, this one's up there with the Brahmas for inconsequential in a sense. I don't really see a lot of these players that other teams are going to go like, oh, I need to go sign this guy. It's not like Derek Dillon or Boogie Roberts where teams are going to go out their way to get him. But it is what it is. So that'll do it for this video. Again, a bunch of players ended up getting cut. Some insane, shocking ones that we just didn't see coming. I know Anthony Beck talked about it on X. It is a pretty sad day. A bunch of players, over 100 players, are getting cut and released today. And considering the fact that only some of these guys are probably going to sign elsewhere, it really does suck for them. But if you want any solace in all this, it means that we do have the best of the best. When guys like Boogie Roberts, Luis Aguilar are getting cut from their teams, that means that there is a ton of talent in this league, which is what everyone did want to see in a merged league. So that is a good thing. So if you enjoyed this, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell to be notified as soon as I upload any videos. If you want to support the channel, you can become a member. I am planning to start adding a monthly non-UFL video that is channel member exclusives, with the first one coming out in the next couple days. So if you want to see that video, make sure to become a member. You can either click the link down below in the description or the join button. Memberships start as low as $1 a month and up to $3. And as always, guys, have a great night.